Hello, hello, my wonderful, wonderful people. Happy Friday. Welcome to the Sabby Sab Show. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, and Twitter. Welcome all. I want to give shout outs to people quickly in the chat. What's going on? Chris Bayridge 1 AOC is such a gaslighting, lying piece of shit. Welcome. What's going on? Jesus says AOC, the new mommy bread. Oh boy. What's going on? Raymond says AOCIA at it again. Shout out to Joe says, hi, perfect people. Greetings, sweary fairy. I swear, anytime I see a liberal tweet, all I hear is fart noises. Does that make me immature? That's funny. That's a good one. Shout out to Janice says, yay, I get to watch it live again. Welcome, Janice. What's going on? No more lullabies. Here we go. Shout out to Salgato says, the global south is shouting. Greetings. Angela says, hey, everyone, countdown to Sabby and no, not immature, smart at Sweary Fairy. All right, Sweary Fairy, you got a shout out there. What's going on, Lawrence Johnson? Always great to see you, says Sabby, exclamation point. Shout out to Oz. An emoji with sunglasses. I'm going to say that means cool. What's going on, Ivan? Sell out AOC, the new Pelosi. Man, you guys are brutal. What's going on? Ashura says, of course, AOC blames just Republicans and herself along with the party she loves so much. Ouch. Eric Gray says, what's good, everybody? Enjoying this summer break and roasting trash politicians. What's going on? Lucky Burrito says, namaste, Sabby. Namaste to you too. Shout out to Comrade Cam. Hey, Sabby. Hey, everyone. Shout out to Nom says, what's up? What's up? What's going on? Ogre Smoker says, tear that cough rep AOC apart. Oh, geez. Shout out to Eric T. Red says, at Oz LaFave, be cool. You guys are brutal. All right, guys, let's go ahead and get into tonight's segment. What are we talking about tonight? Two interesting stories that I want to break down for you this evening. All right, so tonight I'm discussing AOC blames red states. Is she correct? Or is there something that she's missing in that statement? I'm also going to discuss CNN confuses liberals and leftists. How on earth could that have happened? Well, that's how mainstream media goes nowadays. They tend to group us together when we are not the same. So let's go ahead and get into those stories tonight. I'm actually going to go ahead and get started with that AOC story. So for those who are not aware, the House has passed legislation for gun reform. So it has passed in the House. Now it is going to go to the Senate, and that is where I think they are going to find a challenge. Not to say it will not pass in the Senate, but I think there's going to be challenges there. Now, I want to give a shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. Let me go ahead and get this going for you. Case Study, always doing phenomenal work, of course. But there's something else that came up in this conversation about gun reform legislation. And that is, who is to blame? I actually am going to let this clip play in its entirety first. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to add commentary in between. And then I actually have some statistics that I do want to show you when it comes to gun violence in this country. So let's go ahead and share this. Again, shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. He says, this is coming from Fox News. He says, House passes sweeping gun control bill. So let's go ahead and get into this.
The Democrat-led House passing a sweeping gun reform bill that would raise the minimum age for purchasing semi-automatic rifles from 18 to 21. It would also improve mental health programs, bolster school security, and enhance background checks and ban high-capacity ammo and magazines. The bill is unlikely to pass the Senate. It comes as Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is attempting to divert attention away from the gun violence we're seeing in her state, despite the laws on the books, and pin the blame on Republicans instead.
There is no discussion about gun violence in New York City without discussing the iron pipeline that is Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and honorary mention to Ohio. There's no discussion about gun violence in Chicago without talking about Indiana, because the violence and the mothers that we have to comfort are losing children due to the guns and the carnage and the lawlessness unleashed by those states. This is about blood money.
New York City seeing percentages of crime and shootings jump by double digits just this year.
Okay, let's go ahead and break this down. Let's get back into this video. Here we go.
The Democrat-led House passing a sweeping gun reform bill that would raise the minimum age for purchasing semi-automatic rifles from 18 to 21.
Okay, let's take a look at this for a second. House passes sweeping gun control bill. So this is what they have in this bill, or these are some of the things they have in this bill. There could be more. Bills can be lengthy. Minimum age of 21 to buy semi-auto rifle. Improvements in mental health programs. Bolstering school security. Enhancing background checks. Prohibit sale of high-capacity ammo magazines. Now, let's break these down for a second before I get into the rest of the video. Minimum age of 21 to buy a semi-auto rifle. So I feel like that's fair. I feel like that makes sense. Now, that is not to say that just because someone is 21 or over the age of 21, that they're not going to be violent after purchasing a gun. That doesn't mean that they're not going to do some type of a mass shooting per se. But I do think you need some type of age restriction. I don't think a 16, 17-year-old should just be able to go out and buy a semi-auto rifle. So I do think that that's reasonable. Number two, improvements in mental health programs. This is the one that I struggle with a bit, because I don't think you need improvements. I think you need an blah, blah, blah. I can't talk tonight. I'm sorry. I think you need a complete overhaul of the healthcare system in this country. Improving mental health programs isn't going to fully fix those programs. In order to do that, you're going to have to give everybody healthcare in this country. This is a big part of the problem. They are taking a slice of the pie instead of taking the entire pie and trying to fix the overall issue. Just because you have health insurance, that doesn't mean your health insurance covers mental health. And if you don't have health insurance, you're not covered for mental health. So again, fixing or improving the mental health programs, you would have to kick that back to giving everybody universal health care in this country. That's the overall issue. They don't want to do that. This is what I was saying before about them giving us crumbs. They think that if they just improve the mental health programs that already exist, this is going to fix the problem. That might put a dent into the problem, but it's not going to completely fix it, because not everyone is going to be able to afford to go to a mental health program. This is a health care issue. That's the problem. And they don't want to do that. So many things can be fixed by just giving everybody universal health care. Why are people not taking those mental health programs? Why are they not doing it? Some people can't afford it. It's not covered in their insurance. So what I would have liked to see here, instead of improvements in mental health programs, passing universal health care for everyone in this country so that everyone can participate in mental health programs if needed to do so. That's what I would like to see there. Number three, bolstering school security. Here comes the police state. You're going to start seeing more security guards at schools. Well, if this passes, more of a police presence at these institutions. And we are going to start to feel like we live in a police state. Even though we do have a police state, we're going to start to feel like we live in an increased police state. This is a big part of the problem. They still believe that you fix the problem by increasing police presence. I disagree with that. I think, again, you have to go back to the healthcare issue. So don't be surprised if you start to see an increased presence at schools now. Number 4, enhancing background checks. I have no problem with that. Yes, I do think there should be background checks. Can you believe it's 2022 and there are some states that weren't performing any type of background check? Like, this should have been taken care of already. So yes, I agree with that. And number 5, prohibit sale of high capacity ammo magazines. This is also something that I feel should have been done a long time ago. Now, here's the problem. Is this going to pass in the Senate? I don't know. You would need every Democrat to approve the bill. Will all of them do it? That's something we'll have to wait to find out. We'll have to wait to find out. So again, the problems that I have with this is, number 1, improvements in mental health programs. That should be give everyone universal health care. That way everyone can have access to mental health programs, number 1. The other problem I have with this is bolstering school security. Those police officers at those schools, and you talk to people that had police officers or security guards, heavy presence at their schools, they don't actually help the students. And in fact, they hinder the students. They make the students more afraid. But that presence is not good for students. Just ask anybody, ask myself, people who have worked in education. I do not agree with that. And then, yeah, so the rest of that I can get down with. Now let's go back into the video because, again, AOC is blaming certain states. And I'm going to show you something about these states. So let's go back in.
It would also improve mental health programs, bolster school security, and enhance background checks and ban high-capacity ammo and magazines. The bill is unlikely to pass the Senate. It comes as Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is attempting to divert attention away from the gun violence we're seeing in her state, despite the laws on the books, and pin the blame on Republicans instead.
There is no discussion about gun violence in New York City without discussing the iron pipeline that is Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and honorary mention to Ohio. There's no discussion about gun violence in Chicago without talking about Indiana, because the violence and the mothers that we have to comfort are losing children due to the guns and the carnage and the lawlessness unleashed by those states.
Okay, let's talk about something for a second. She called out certain states. Georgia was one of them. South Carolina was one of them. I went to college in South Carolina. North Carolina, she mentioned. Virginia, she mentioned, although some would argue that Virginia is somewhat blue. I don't know. She mentioned Indiana, and she's making the comparison that you really can't blame the gun violence in New York City or New York State unless you also blame the gun violence in those states as well. So most of those states are red states. And here's something that I want to point out. I think she's looking at this the wrong way. I don't think this should be a red-blue issue. Same thing for the announcer on Fox News when she mentions the red states. I think, again, we should not look at this as a left-right issue. Why is it that certain states have higher levels of gun violence than others? Some people think it's because of the gun laws. That could be part of it, but it goes deeper than that. I'm going to finish this and I'm going to show you some statistics about gun violence in the United States.
This is about blood money.
New York City seeing percentages of crime and shootings jump.
Let's look at these percentages here about New York City crime. And of course, she brought this up because that's AOC's city. Overall crime rate is up 43%, shootings up 10%, reports of gunfire 345, shootings per day average of 3+. You know, I've been asking for statistics about the so-called crime increase in New York City. This is what they're giving us. I would need to see where is this data coming from. I would also need to see what areas is this coming from in New York City. Is this New York City per se, or is it also greater New York City? In other words, like greater Boston, the metropolitan area. I also want to point out something here. They listed overall crime 43%. What does that include? I don't like when people do overall crime. What does that include? What are they considering crime? I would like to see a list of that. Shootings are up 10%. Reports of gunfire, 345. Does that include gunfire by the police? Shootings, does that include shootings committed by the police? These are questions that we need to ask. Because when you say reports of gunfire, well, if I hear gunfire and it turns out it's the police actually shooting their guns, does that count towards reports of gunfire? They don't go into detail with these stats. That's a big part of the problem. Now, let's remember, in reference to New York City, what has Eric Adams done? Eric Adams is giving more money to the police. So if you've increased police funding, why have your crime rates increased when police are supposed to curb crime? Because police don't really prevent crime. Because police only solve 0.02% of crimes. So giving the police more money and increasing the police presence is not decreasing crime in New York City. Someone explain this to Eric Adams. Gave all that money to New York police, and they still haven't decreased the crime rate. Why? I wonder why. Now, I've told you guys oftentimes before that most crime is poverty driven. So I want to show you some numbers. Let's look at gun violence data in the United States. I'm going to go ahead and, oh yeah, that's big enough for you guys. I wanted to make sure it's large enough for you to see it because sometimes it's tiny, 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 tiny. Let's see. Okay, let's look at these numbers here. Make sure I'm looking at the right. Okay, here we go. We want to talk about gun violence. No, I don't want you to summarize me in the morning. We want to talk about gun violence in the United States. Now, this is by state, and I think this is important for people to pay attention to. The top states by gun death rates are, number 1 is Mississippi. Number 2 is Louisiana. Make sure you remember those two in particular. I'm going somewhere with that. Number 3 is Wyoming. Number 4, Missouri. Number 5, Alabama. And number 6 is Alaska. Everyone take a good look at these states listed here. Okay, now let's go down. I also want to show you the states that have the least amount of gun deaths. So let me go down here. Oops, that was the one. Okay. The states with the lowest gun death rates in 2020 per the CDC, alongside the percentage of homes with a gun in 2007 through 2016 were, and by the way, this does not surprise me. Number 1 is Hawaii, 3.4. Number 2 is Massachusetts. I live in Massachusetts. That doesn't surprise me. 3.7. Number 3 is New Jersey, 5. Number 4 is Rhode Island, 5.1. And look at here. Number 5 is New York, 5.3. I want you to remember these states here that have the least amount of gun deaths. Now let's go back up and look at these states here that have the most amount of gun deaths. Again, these do not surprise me. Now we're going to look at something else. Remember those states in your head. I could pull it back up again as well. We're going to look at poverty rate, because this is something I've always told people before. Most crime is poverty driven. So let's take a look here. Share my screen. Make this a little bit larger for the people in the back. Oh, I need to make this really large. These are tiny numbers. Okay. Poverty rate by state. That's still small. I'm sorry, you guys. It looks large. It's one of those things where it looks larger on my screen, but it doesn't look. Okay, that's better. Poverty rate by state. Number 1 is Mississippi, 19.78%. Number 2 is Louisiana, 18.88%. Now, I'm going to continue on, but I want to go back to that graph, not necessarily graph, that data I just showed you about gun violence, about the deaths. Just going to switch share here really quick. Doesn't let me do 2 shares. Okay, now let's look at this one more time. Top states by gun death rates are, number 1 is Mississippi and number 2 is Louisiana. Do you see a correlation here? Do you see a correlation here with the gun death rates by state versus, stop share, the poverty rate by state? Mississippi and Louisiana were number 1 in reference to gun deaths. When it comes to poverty, Mississippi and Louisiana are number 1. This is important. This is something I've been trying to point out to people. Again, most crime is poverty driven. So when AOC lists those states, which I knew what she was trying to do with that, the red states, calling out the red states, what she left out is a key factor, that those states have higher poverty rates. That's important for people to know. And so instead of making this a red-blue issue, what she should have done, as well as that reporter, they should have made it a poverty issue, but they're not going to do that. This is how they continue to play the red-blue game. Now, there's something else I do want to show you here as well. Let's flip this. And let's look at the states here with the least poverty. Number 1 is New Hampshire. Again, I live in Massachusetts. That does not surprise me. Number 2 is Utah. Number 3 is Maryland. Number 4 is Minnesota. And look at here. Number 5 is Hawaii. Now, let's go back to that gun death data. Let's go back to this portion here with the least amount of gun deaths. Do you see any similarities? Hawaii, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Rhode Island, New York. Notice Hawaii is still here. All of them may not be exactly the same, but there is a correlation here. So this is a problem. Let's go back to the poverty chart. And this is what mainstream media and this is what politicians have in common. They make it a red-blue game instead of addressing the underlying issue, which is poverty. That's the problem. These poverty rates, we need to pay attention to this. So again, these are the states. This is the first one is the least amount of poverty. Again, New Hampshire, that does not surprise me. So you're going down. There's New Jersey, there's Massachusetts. Do you see what I mean? So again, if I were to flip this, Mississippi, Louisiana, New Mexico, West Virginia, Kentucky, Arkansas, Alabama. Yes, AOC, those are red states, but they are also states that have high poverty rates. And that's the issue that they should be addressing. Why do those states have high poverty rates? They need to get to that issue. Another thing I want to point out as someone who was a former educator, I can also tell you when looking at this poverty rate, Mississippi, Louisiana, New Mexico, West Virginia, Kentucky, Arkansas, Alabama also do not do well if you look at education rates. Those states tend to have underperforming schools. When you look at it by state, they are ranked at the bottom when it comes to education in the United States. So what's really going on? If you have high poverty, how are you going to have schools that are funded well? You're not, because the schools are funded by property taxes. Do you guys see the correlation? So you have high poverty, you have poor education, and you have an increase, and you have a lot of gun deaths. They're all connected. So how do you fix the gun violence issue? How do you fix the education issue? You have to fix the poverty issue. That's what needs to be done. I'm not saying you shouldn't have any type of gun reform. I'm not saying you shouldn't have that at all. What I am saying, though, is that going to ultimately completely fix the problem? No, you have to fix the poverty issue. That's the problem. So let me go ahead and move this out of the way. Sorry. That's the problem. Let me go to some of the comments in the chat. Michael Jordan said, facts, exactly. Refunding the police is not the answer. Right. That's not going. Look, the numbers they just showed you. And like I said, we need more data on that. But the numbers that they just showed you about New York City in particular, if that is true, if crime is still increasing and he gave more money to the police and they have more police presence in New York City, if you talk to people who live there, I talk to my friends that live there, there's police everywhere now in New York City. So why is the crime rate still going up? So that goes to show you adding more police and giving more money to the police does not fix crime issue. They kind of just let the cat out the bag, but not many people are going to pick up on that when they watch that. That's the problem. Going to some of the comments in the chat. What's up, Mark? Pugsley, you're still an educator, Sabs. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of issues that people are going to have about this. Eric T. Red says high poverty rates push up gun deaths of all kinds. Right. I mean, like, what? This is why we need more information, I will say. Like, these gun deaths, what were the incidents? Were these robberies? Were these burglaries? Were these people trying to steal food? Was it people trying to steal money? What are the incidents? They're not going to mention that on mainstream media. They're not going to talk about that. John to Emily Transition Vlog says U.S. is a failed state. It's terrible. It's terrible. Let's see. JB said, hey, Sabs, remember when the crime rate in NYC dropped when police went on strike? Isn't that surprising? I wonder why. I wonder. President Jesus says psychological and economic stress. Gas prices are high. Food has increased. Everything's higher now. Everything's higher. But again, if you don't fix the poverty issue, those things are not going to improve. And that's something that Congress doesn't want to talk about, including the so-called progressives that are there as well. They don't want to talk about that. That's a big part of the problem. They don't actually want someone to say on the House floor, well, we need to fix the poverty issue, and then that'll help fix the education issue, that'll fix the schools, that'll fix the gun violence issue. We need to fix the poverty issue. They don't want anyone to say that. They don't want anyone to say that. How dare you tell us to give the American people money? We need to give $40 billion to Ukraine instead. That's how it goes. All right, I am going to our second story, because the gist that I want you to get out of that is that just goes to show you how, like, CNN, Fox News, they all do it. They continue to make it a red-blue game instead of focusing on the real issue. Next story. This one is interesting. So you have to hear about this, and I got to give a shout out to Case Study QB for this one as well. I want you to hear the way that some of these networks are describing progressives, liberals, and they got it all wrong. Now, shout out again to Case Study QB for this as well. He goes on to say, this was CNN, progressive DA being recalled. The Democratic Party is not anywhere as liberal as some progressive wish it were. So this video is going to crack you up. Let's go ahead and get into this. I'm going to let the entire video play first, and then I'm going to chime in here and there because there's some things about this that really just made me cringe. So here we go.
Obviously, the president's trying to make this about both sides and link the gun reform. Okay. This is a progressive DA who sort of, is emblematic of where some of the progressive left are in this country. What does it tell us about the Democratic Party that this happened?
I think it tells you the same thing. I feel like we've done this segment like 5 or 6 times over the last 5 or 6 years. That is, the Democratic Party is not anywhere as liberal, at least the voters aren't anywhere as liberal as some progressives wish it were, right? So the majority of voters in the Democratic Party identify as either moderate or conservative. That's specifically true of voters of color, who, of course, make up the Democratic Party's base. And indeed, very liberals within the Democratic Party, according to a CNN SSRS poll from earlier this year, found that only about 1/5 of all Democrats identify as very liberal. And that's why someone like Chesa Boudin in San Francisco, they looked at his record, they had no problem tossing him out, even in a city that Joe Biden won by 73 points in 2020.
Right. So when you're saying 1/5 of the party, again, I always like to remind people only about 30% of the public identify as Democrats. You're talking about 1/5 of a third. You're getting smaller numbers.
You're in terms of the general electorate, you're only talking about 1/10 to maybe 1/8.
Right. Okay. So that is obviously very significant. Now, President Biden obviously recognizes this is a problem for his party. That's why he said the voters have sent a message calling on states to invest more money for policing. Okay. This is a bigger problem than San Francisco.
Yes, it is a bigger problem than San Francisco. If you look nationally, right, you look at the polling, the percentage of Americans who are dissatisfied with crime policies is the highest right now as it has been all century. And we've seen a 20-point jump over the last 2 years alone. It's up to now, you can see it on your screen, 72% of Americans nationwide are dissatisfied with crime policy nationally. And it's beyond just San Francisco where we've been seeing rising crime rates, right? We can look at theft or larceny. And what you can see across the major cities, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, double-digit rises in those over the last year. And in places like New York and Chicago, those rises are approaching 50%. It's no wonder that Lightfoot in Chicago, Mayor Lightfoot, who's running for re-election next year, is already coming out of the box with a very tough on crime message, because the fact of the matter is voters see where the crime rates are and they are reacting.
They are reacting. And you see it in New York, obviously got a new mayor, but it is the front
and he's tough on crime too. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, Harry Anton, thank you very much.
Let's break this down, shall we? Let's break this down.
Obviously, the president's trying to make this about both sides and link the gun reform. Okay. This is a progressive DA who sort of, is emblematic of where some of the progressive left are in this country. What is it?
Let's start with that part. A progressive DA. A what? What the hell is a progressive DA? How are you progressive in a DA? Someone explain that to me. Listen to this. I want you to pay close attention to the way that they frame things in this segment. Listen to this.
Tell us about the Democratic Party that this happened.
I think it tells you the same thing. I feel like we've done this segment like 5 or 6 times over the last 5 or 6 years. That is, the Democratic Party is not anywhere as liberal, at least the voters aren't anywhere as liberal as some progressives wish it were. Right?
So a progressive DA was recalled. And what they're trying to say here is that, see, look, I told you, people don't want these progressives in these positions. Now, listen to what he just said. Listen to what he just said. Let me go back just a little bit.
Party is not anywhere as liberal, at least the voters aren't anywhere as liberal as some progressives wish it were.
He just told you when it comes to the Democratic Party, the voters are not anywhere as liberal as some progressives wish they were. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you are a Democrat, aren't you supposed to be liberal anyway? What does he mean anywhere near as liberal? See, he is saying the quiet part out loud. He's letting you know that the Democratic Party is still a right-wing party. The Democratic Party is not a far left party. It's not a left party. It is a right-wing party. He just said the quiet part out loud. Let's go on. There's more. There's more.
Right? So the majority of voters in the Democratic Party identify as either moderate or conservative.
The majority of voters in the Democratic Party identify as moderate or conservative. Who is he talking about? Who are the majority of voters that he's talking about? See, this is something you need to pay close attention to. Who are the people who usually go out and vote? What age groups? It's not my age group. It's usually people who are 60 and over. They're the ones who are heavily voting. So if he tells you the majority of Democrat voters, I want you to understand which demographic he is referring to. He's not referring to Gen X. He's not referring to millennials. He's not referring to Gen Z. Millennials, we are the largest population. So I want you to just think about what he's saying and the way that he's saying it, because it's easy to watch this segment and you hear these words. The majority of Democratic voters are moderate / conservative. So I guess I should be voting for the moderate candidates. You see how that works? Most people aren't going to stop and say, well, wait a minute, who are the majority of Democrat voters? That's important for you to know. He's not going to tell you that. He's going to go into this chart here, which I want to show you.
Specifically true of voters of color, who, of course.
Okay, let's look at this chart. Let's look at these numbers. Let's break this down. Democrat voters, moderate / conservative, 64%. Moderate / conservative. How the hell are you / conservative if you're supposed to be a Democrat? Why? Because it's still a right-wing party. 17%, somewhat liberal. What the hell is somewhat liberal? What is that? Break that down for me and tell me what that means. 17%, very liberal. You see, this is why, notice, there's no percentage on there. They give you no data for people that are progressive. No data for people who are socialists. Who sometimes both of those groups may still vote in the Democrat Party. But if you notice, you see no percentage for that. None. Why is that? I think that if they showed you the real numbers, I think that people would be surprised to see how many people have moved further to the left in this country. I don't think they want you to see that. This is the narrative that they want you to see. This is the narrative they want you to believe. Moderate / conservative. This is not a bragging point. It really isn't. How Democrats identify ideologically. And it says here, includes Democrat-leaning independents. This is what they want you to see. This is what they want you to believe, because this is how they want you to vote. They want you to vote for the moderate conservative candidates. They don't want you to vote for progressive candidates. Notice, there's no demographics. Where are the demographics for this poll? I want to know. Why are they not telling you? What were the age groups? Who did you poll? Where did you poll? Like, what states did you poll in? How many people did you poll? They don't tell you. Exactly where, Pilgrim. It's a way to show how Biden is popular, actually, LOL. See what I mean? You see what they're doing? There's something else he said here that I found kind of cringe.
Conservative. That's specifically true of voters of color, who, of course, make up the Democratic Party's base.
He said it's specifically true for voters of color who make up the Democratic Party's base. Who are the voters of color? Who? What are you talking about? The Democratic Party can't win without the African American vote. Just say that. What's this voters of color thing? Someone explain this to me. No, when it comes to the Democratic Party, without the African American vote, Democrats do not win. He's not saying that to you. You guys paying attention to this? That's important for people to know. Voters of color. I would beg to differ. If we were to look at the Latino community, do you think all of them just automatically vote Democrat? No. Some of them are conservative Republicans. Don't ask me. Do the research. Do the research. So who are these voters of color? They're Black people. Why won't he tell you that? When you guys see this, you really need to call these things out. That's BS. I don't even know who this guy is. But this is ridiculous. Let's go back in. He couldn't even say African American. He had to say voters of color.
And indeed, very liberals within the Democratic Party, according to a CNN SSRS poll from earlier this year, found that only about a fifth of all Democrats identify as very liberal. And that's why someone like Chesa Boudin in San Francisco, they looked at his record, they had no problem tossing him out, even in a city that Joe Biden won by 73 points in 2020.
Right.
So he just told you a CNN poll said that only a fifth of Democrats identify as very liberal. A CNN poll. And what network is he on right now? CNN. Does anybody find that suspicious? You couldn't find any other polls? You had to use the CNN poll because you're on CNN right now? So we're supposed to believe that? Again, they give you no demographics. They don't tell you who they polled. They just give you these short little snippets here and there. This is the narrative that they want you to believe.
You're saying a fifth of the party. Again, I always like to remind people only about 30% of the public identify as Democrats. You're talking about a fifth of a third. You're getting smaller numbers.
You're, in terms of the general electorate, you're only talking about a tenth to maybe an eighth.
Right. Okay. So that is obviously very significant. Now,
again, I want to remind you, they're talking about the people who usually vote. They're not talking about people who were under 60. They're talking about a certain demographic of people.
President Biden obviously recognizes this is a problem for his party. That's why he said the voters have sent a message calling on states to invest more money for policing. Okay, this is a bigger problem than San Francisco.
Yes, it is a bigger problem than San Francisco. If you look nationally, right, you look at the polling, the percentage of Americans who are dissatisfied with crime policies is the highest right now as it has been all century. And
let's break this down. Dissatisfied with the nation's policies to control/reduce crime. 2022 says 72%. 2021, 65%. 2020, 49%. 2019, 50%. Let's all remember what happened over the years. Now, if you go to 2021, what did we have last year? Pandemic, which still is an issue, but pandemic. 2022, what do we have? Inflation. You see how the crime rate is going up? How it goes up as poverty increases? Dissatisfied with the nation's policies to control/reduce crime. Does that mean that they want more police, though? Again, who did he poll? Who did they poll? They don't even tell you. Who you polling? They're not polling me. They're probably not polling most of you. They're polling people that have landlines. I don't know too many people with landlines except for my parents and grandparents, okay? That's the problem with these polls. Let's go on.
We've seen a 20-point jump over the last 2 years alone. It's up to now, you can see it on your screen, 72%.
Almost a 20% jump over 2 years alone. Again, what happened 2 years ago? The pandemic. You had states like mine that closed down, businesses closed down, especially the small businesses. By the time they lifted those restrictions and said that you can operate again, a lot of those businesses, they didn't last because they weren't making any income. So they couldn't pay the taxes. They couldn't pay the bills. So they had to close their businesses for good. Make sure you mention that, Mr. Man. He does not mention that. So you had unemployment increase. You had evictions increase. Not to mention Joe Biden kicked people off of unemployment back in September on Labor Day. Make sure you mention that. You have people that have been overworked at their jobs. In November, over 4 million people quit their jobs in this country. Make sure you mention that. But they are going to tell you to increase policing. Not once will you hear them say, maybe we should address this poverty issue that's going on. Not once. Not once.
Of Americans nationwide are dissatisfied with crime policy nationally. And it's beyond just San Francisco where we've been seeing rising crime rates, right? We can look at theft.
Oh, San Francisco. I just want to add San Francisco, which has what, the highest rent in the country? One of the most expensive cities to live in the United States. I wonder why their crime rate has increased. I wonder why.
Or larceny. And what you can see across the major cities, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, double.
All right, let's look at these cities. Chicago, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles. All of these cities are expensive. It's expensive to live in those cities. This is the problem. Look at what it says. Change in theft and larceny rate. Why do people steal? Why do people steal food? Why do people steal money? Because they don't have it. Because they don't have it. He mentions these 4 cities as if we're all supposed to be surprised. Give me a break. Come on. Come on. Let's point them out. Los Angeles. Remember what happened during the pandemic with Los Angeles? With the whole state of California? Weren't they one of the states that shut down? And businesses closed and people lost their jobs? Surprise, surprise. That also includes San Francisco, New York. Weren't they one of the cities that shut down during the pandemic? You guys see the connection here? Make sure you mention that. We'll go back in for a little bit more.
Double-digit rises in those over the last year. And in places like New York and Chicago, those rises are approaching 50%. It's no wonder that Lightfoot in Chicago, Mayor Lightfoot, who's running for re-election next year, is already coming out of the box with a very tough on crime message, because the fact of the matter is voters see where the crime rates are and they are reacting.
Mayor Lightfoot may have not been the best example. The same mayor who covered up police incidents in Chicago of police killing unarmed Black people, that same mayor, she's one of the most corrupt mayors in the United States. So you probably should have used a better example. Probably should have used this. We are entering an increased police state. They're going to want control. They're going to want order. And this is how they're going to respond to people having increased poverty, having homelessness issues. I told you guys this before. Rome and I did Tour for the Poor in Boston recently. There's now a mini Skid Row here in Boston. There was always homeless people, but it wasn't that many as there are now. It's increasing all across the United States. It's a problem. It's a problem. This is how they want to control it. We need more cops. We need a police state. We need a cop on every corner. That's what it's coming to. Meanwhile, if you're poor, just because you have more cops in your neighborhood, are you no longer going to be poor? No, you're still going to be poor. That's the problem. You're still going to have to struggle. I don't see them trying to fix that shit. I also want to point out when he mentioned San Francisco, I want to remind you who's from San Francisco. That's Pelosi. That's Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein. Nancy Pelosi, who's worth millions of dollars, has a high homeless population in her district, has increased crime in her district, but Nancy Pelosi doesn't have to experience it herself because she's a millionaire. None of these politicians are really out to help us. None of them. Doesn't matter if they're Republican, doesn't matter if they're Democrat. They're done. This is why we have to do mutual aid. This is why we have to help people in our communities on our own. You cannot rely on the government to do what they are supposed to do for your community. The Black Panthers knew that. That's why they decided to help themselves. Doesn't matter. Red, blue, at the end of the day, neither of them are really for you. I'm going to go to some of the comments and then I have to head out. Creative Experiment said, Sabby, I lived in San Francisco. They really love Pelosi and Zuckerberg, and Twitter headquarters is there. They are all brainwashed there. Progressives have no chance there. Yeah, I talked to Shahid Buttar. He's been on my show twice, and he was telling me like the issues that they have there. It's terrible. Terrible. Eric T. Red said, and remember, billionaires and megacorps are richer than ever. Absolutely. Do you guys know that some not all of them, some of the CEOs actually doubled their wealth during the pandemic? Something people need to know about. People need to know about. But they can't even give everybody health care in this country. Tim says, meanwhile, only 2 to 3 drug busts a day, 2 to 3 Fenty deaths per day, and only 2% case solve rate on property crime. I don't even know what cops really do anymore. I've never seen them like solve crime. It's not what you see on TV. It's not what you see in the movie. Joker says rent is more than minimum wage. I had a friend that lived in San Francisco for a year. She had 4 roommates. 4 roommates in her 30s. That's how expensive rent is in San Francisco. Bad Cookie says revolutionary blackout insider trading is a crime as well. Are they going to do anything about it? That's a good question. That also includes Pelosi because she loves to do insider trading. All right, guys. I am about to head out, but I do want to let you know if you want more Sabby, you can join me on my channel. I'll be there in about an hour, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tonight, I'm talking about, well, number one, Jackson Hinkle is stopping by. Something happened to Jackson Hinkle. It's not good news, but he's coming to share that and how some of us can help. I'll also be discussing Chris Hedges' Bernie Sanders warning. That's going to be an important discussion. That's also going to lead into my call-in segment later on tonight. Is Chris Hedges right about Bernie Sanders? And I'm also going to discuss ballot initiative update. What happened in South Dakota in reference to Medicaid expansion? So that is going to be an interesting story as well. So see you guys there at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at my channel, Sabby Sabs. See you there. Guys, have a good evening. Have a good weekend. And don't forget to please donate to Rome's Tour for the Poor. Now that's scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Rome's next event is going to be in Kansas with Nick. They're doing like a barbecue. They're also going to give out items there as well. So if you want to donate to Rome, please do so. It's across the bottom of the screen. So you have Cash App, you have PayPal and Venmo. I recommend Venmo or Cash App. PayPal likes to hold money, and we've had that problem before. So I recommend those options. Other than that, guys, have a good night. It's been a great one. Talk to you later.